So good morning everyone and welcome to the opening session of this year's MASS Scotland annual conference. My name is Ali McInroy, I'm the Chief Exec at Technology Scotland, the home of the MASS Scotland network, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all this morning. For those of you who have been to our conference in the past, you'll know that this is not normally how we do things. We normally pride ourselves on creating a very interactive, sociable environment fueled by coffee, food and ultimately wine. That option, sadly, is not available to us this year. We are living in strange and unprecedented times, as you all know, a time when the world has been asked to keep its distance, and we were quite literally asked to stay in our homes. No one could have anticipated this, and the impact has, of course, been profound, not least, of course, in the transport sector, which is facing challenges I think none of us really could have dreamed of. MASS will not be immune to this impact, of course, but I'm sure that we will discuss this in detail over the coming days. But MASS development continues, and it must continue. The challenges we faced in a pre-COVID world around sustainability, inclusivity, public health, these have not gone away. MASS has a huge role to play here, re-engaging people with our wider transport networks and supporting new flexible transport models to feed a brand new type of demand. It's a big challenge, no doubt, but it's also a big opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to discussing how we approach this over the next couple of days. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank our sponsors, Cubic, IBI and Enterprise. Without their support, events like this, even online events like this, simply cannot happen. And we're very grateful for the support, not just for this year's event, but also their continuing support through to our 2021 event, which will definitely be back next year, hopefully back to its physical form with the coffee, pastries and wine that I mentioned earlier on. Thanks also to Technology Scotland's corporate sponsors, Enigma People Solutions and Scintilla, who have provided vital ongoing support to Technology Scotland and all its networks over the last couple of years. So big thanks to them too. MASS Scotland will be familiar to many of you, I'm sure, but such as the opportunity of online events, we have many new organisations attending today from all over the world. And I'd say a very warm welcome to all of you, wherever you are connecting in from today. But MASS Scotland, in brief, is a network of around 75 private and public sector organisations from across the MASS supply chain, who all share a vision to develop and deploy MASS solutions across Scotland. We work with stakeholders to accelerate the delivery of MASS in Scotland, I think illustrated not least by the Scottish Government's MASS programme, which we will hear more about later this morning. In doing so, of course, we hope to position Scotland as a global lead in MASS development. We have an excellent programme over the next couple of days. Following on from our keynote session this morning, we will have a more detailed session on Scotland's MASS programme, and we'll explore the current projects within that and also look ahead to round two of funding in the next few months. After that, we will run a series of technical sessions across this afternoon and tomorrow morning, which will look at areas such as data, user engagement, policy and procurement, and connectivity. Our final session is one I'm really looking forward to, and we will be discussing the role of MASS as we live in and beyond the current COVID pandemic. I suspect that is a subject area that will come up again and again over the next couple of days. Some logistics just to help you navigate the next couple of days. You will have received two attendee links, one for day one and one for day two. You're on here, so I'm assuming you've worked out at least part of this. These links will allow you to access all sessions across the 2 days, and you can come and go as you please during these sessions through those links. One important thing to note, we will need to close the webinar after each session to prepare for the next session. So you will need to click on that link again a couple of times through today to do that. So for example, when this session closes at 10:40, we will close the webinar briefly to allow us to set up for the plenary session, which will begin at 11 o'clock. I'd also like to point you in the direction of our networking tool for this year's conference. We're using Slack. and you should now have received details on how to sign up through your email. These details will also be in the chat functionality, and you can click from there. Please jump on there anytime and use this to continue discussions and hopefully make some new connections. It's very easy to use, so I do encourage you to jump on there. Should point out that useful information will be added to the chat functionality on your screens regularly across the 2 days, and will include useful links that are relevant to the presentations you're viewing, among other things. You're probably all familiar with Zoom after 6 months of almost constant use of similar platforms, but there is also a Q&A functionality, and I would encourage you to enter your questions into that at any stage for our speakers throughout the sessions. Just to round off the housekeeping in terms of really important stuff, coffee will be in your kitchen, your toilets are probably upstairs, and if your smoke alarm goes off, then I would suggest that you go and check it out. That's the health and safety tip for today. So that brings us on now to our keynote session, and I'm delighted that we are able to welcome Michael Matheson, MSP, Cabinet Secretary for Transport and Infrastructure within Scottish Government, to deliver our opening address. Now, I say welcome, but unfortunately Mr Matheson is unable to join us live today. As you will appreciate, our politicians are being pulled all over the place at the moment as a result of the current situation in which we live. However, Mr Matheson has very kindly recorded a message for us that, tech permitting, I can share with you now.
Good morning, and I'm sorry I'm unable to join you in person, but first let me thank MASS Scotland for the opportunity to speak today and for their continued efforts over the year in promoting the emerging MASS concept. I think it's testament to all the good work that they do that we are now celebrating the 4th annual MASS Scotland conference. It's a markedly different time from when I launched the MASS Investment Fund at this same event last year. So let me start by talking a little about the current situation. The impact of COVID-19 has changed our economy, our society, and our use of technology as we emerge from recovery and as we look to the future of transport. On the 26th of May, the Transport Transition Plan was launched, outlining the actions that we will take to support the transition through and out of the COVID-19 crisis. This plan consisted of 4 key areas. Firstly, keeping public transport safe, including guidance for those operating our public transport system. Secondly, assessing demand for travel and making decisions, including analytical work being undertaken. Thirdly, adapting our transport system, including the funding and support being provided for active travel and public transport that has been undertaken since the start of the pandemic. And finally, looking at the emerging issues from our stakeholders. As with other sectors of the economy, transport will be fundamentally changed following the impact of the pandemic. And this is where I think mobility as a service is best placed to help capitalise on this period of change. We need to build on the increased support for active travel and continue to provide others with alternatives to single occupancy car journeys. We need to build the new normal. The question about the future of demand for transport is about people's and businesses' new normal behaviour and their decisions around the choices that they make during and after the pandemic in terms of work, education, leisure, visiting family, to name but a few. This will all drive our decisions about the use of travel. Uncertainty also lies in whether the behavioural changes currently seen, such as the reduced confidence in the use of public transport and an increase in cycling, will be temporary or revert to previous levels after the pandemic, or if these changes will be maintained over a short or longer term. As we transition through the phases of the lockdown, we are continually monitoring and publishing both what the public attitudes are to travel and how they actually travel. This evidence helps us to both plan and mitigate for those uncertainties. MAS has the potential to embrace the requirements needed to sustain the positive behavioural changes through the periods that I've mentioned over the course of the last few months. Greater use of local decision making with people working from home, the use of digital technology, and a higher proportion of cycling journeys such as those that we've seen during the pandemic, which in turn positively impact on our emission levels. To aid recovery, our future transport system still needs to deliver the National Transport Strategy priorities. These priorities are set out very clearly in the strategy, with reducing inequalities, taking climate action, delivering inclusive economic growth, and improving our health and well-being, albeit in the new COVID-19 pandemic context. From research that's been carried out on transport and travel behaviour during the course of the pandemic, we are aware that there is a reduced level of capacity in the public transport system due to physical distancing requirements. Alongside that, there are also concerns around contracting the virus while using public transport. And there are indications that a number of people intend to make greater use of their car more than using public transport. Therefore, efforts need to be made to capitalise on the positive travel behaviours seen during the course of the pandemic. Notably, the number of people who are cycling more and those who have indicated that they would like to walk and cycle more in the future, and to mitigate against the trends that could increase carbon emissions. I mentioned the National Transport Strategy, which many of you will be aware I published earlier this year, and we are now progressing with the second Strategic Transport Projects Review. Both of these areas of work will play a significant part in the process of helping to shape our transport system for the future, and also setting out the goals which will determine the type of transport investment that we will be making over the course of the next 20 years. The second Strategic Transport Projects Review will enable us to identify the most appropriate types of intervention to achieve the strategic outcomes that are set out within our National Transport Strategy. Phase 1 of the STPR2 process will aim to report in spring 2021 and will initially focus on recommendations around the areas that can take account of the COVID-19 context and to lock in transport terms, the positive benefits and travel behaviours of individuals, and help to provide a step change in investment which will support the priorities and the outcomes that are set out within the National Transport Strategy itself. The second phase will contain a more detailed analysis and will report in late 2021 and take a more detailed holistic view and examine potential improvements to transport across the country in the round. I know that Heather Cowan from Transport Scotland will be speaking later about the National Transport Strategy in much more detail, but I just wanted to highlight the climate action priority set out in the strategy. Even with COVID-19 taking up our thoughts and our actions, we must remember that we will still face a global challenge when it comes to climate change and the climate change emergency. And we need to make sure that we take significant action to reduce our carbon emissions. The climate change plan is currently being updated to respond to the new targets which were passed as part of the Climate Change Act 2019. These very ambitious targets include reducing emissions by 75% by 2030 and by being net zero by 2045. Although our emissions are beginning to fall compared to 1990 levels, transport continues to be Scotland's biggest emitting sector, and the plan will outline our plans to address this. It's also worth noting that the unprecedented move to home working could have a significant and potentially positive impact in helping to reduce emissions from commuters. In 2019, 4% of Scotland's workforce worked from home. And a recent survey carried out by the ONS reported that some 44% of Scotland's workforce were working from home in April of this year, meaning that the number of people working from home during the COVID pandemic could have approximately increased by almost 40%. To respond to this, our climate change plan update will now support a green recovery alongside other climate change priorities. This means that all our transport policies are being revisited to understand how they contribute to this green recovery, and also take account of the negative and positive changes from the COVID lockdown. We want to lock in positive behaviour, change where that is possible, whilst also ensuring that we continue to consider a just transition. This resonates with the call from stakeholders for government to act quickly, responding to the changes from the lockdown period. I'm delighted to report that it's been a busy year for MAS since I launched the MAS Investment Fund just last year. As the concept continues to gather pace across the globe, I'm pleased to note the high level of engagement that we've received, and I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who has been involved, whether it be in attending stakeholder event days, drop-in sessions, submitting applications to help the delivery of this government's priority, particularly around the National Transport Strategy, and also to assist us in testing out the viability of the MAS concept itself. I hope that you will continue to engage with us when round 2 of the fund is launched in the new year, to ensure that Scotland is at the forefront of these developments. So in conclusion, given the issues I've identified, I want to continue to collectively deliver the National Transport Strategy priorities, and through MAS technology and services offered, help our nation adapt to the new normal. I'm asking you to continue to work with us, our delivery partners, locally, regionally and nationally, to deliver a transport system fit for the 21st century and beyond. Thank you for listening, and please accept my very best wishes for what I hope is a successful conference.
So, some interesting points there from Mr. Matheson, and I think some that we can take encouragement from. Obviously, a strong focus on green recovery and in maintaining momentum around modal shift, but also an eye towards changing work patterns as well. And I think we should be encouraged there because MAS has an opportunity to support all of these things. And we can paint a very nice story of where MAS can support that. And that's something that we at MAS Scotland and others will continue to do over the. Okay, so our first speaker this morning is Klaus Rehfeldt Mosshøi. Klaus told me not to even bother trying to pronounce his name, but I've gone for it there, so that I hope I've got it right. One learn from what's going on elsewhere in the world in other regions. I think it's very important to do so. And Klaus leads he's the CEO of the Danish National Travel Card and National Search Engine, and has been working in Danish public transport for over 15 years. So I'm very interested to hear Klaus's perspective on the development and upscale of mobility as a service. So Klaus, you are very welcome, and over to you.
Thank you for inviting me. I will talk a little bit about the lessons of a national service, and the reason for that is that, like everyone else, we're looking into what is this MaaS thing doing, where we're coming from, and how do we move on from there. And I think there are some hopefully interesting lessons that we can convey from us. Some may be new, some may be old stories, but bear with me on that. So, and please, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the panel session, and Ali will take them with me. So just to say a little bit about who the Danish Travel Card and Travel Planner company, who we are. Essentially, we're standing on three legs. We have a classic travel card solution, very similar to the Oyster card and the OV-Chip card that you know from Holland. It's a card-centric model, so that's one element. The other element is a travel planner. Both of them, national services, cover all modes across the country, except for Bornholm. You have to be very local to understand what that means, but it doesn't really matter. It's a small island that doesn't have the travel card, but otherwise everything else. And the third leg, which is, I think, for public transport equally important, is the service infrastructure. I mean, which is where do you get your prices? There's only one place to get prices in Denmark for standard products. Subsidized products and more specialized products are not with us, but otherwise that, all the product schemes, account management, we do all the revenue sharing between the companies, all time schedules, real-time data, so on is provided from us. A tricky thing, which is validation, which is sometimes, I think, underestimated the complexity of that. It's also a solution that we provide, as well as white label solutions that you can plug into and the call center. So these are essentially the elements, and I think it's important just to understand those as I move along. And just some quick numbers, we have about 2.1 million unique customers, which means that they have identified themselves with the code in Denmark saying who I am. So you need to have a very specific identification in order to take public transport in this country, but anyhow, and we have about 3.1 million cards out there. So we are the second largest payment card in Denmark, actually. Another interesting thing is, I think we have a Net Promoter Score of 12, which I think for public services is actually surprisingly high. Everything in Denmark is related or scaled against Lego, so I'll do the same thing. Lego has an NPS score of about 60. So the fact that we're just even positive, I think, is saying a little bit about how the penetration works. And as you can see, the level of self-service with the Danes is actually quite high. So we have this about 10 to 12% of our customers that either require by phone to call into call centers or to go to managed places to get a top up, but otherwise they essentially manage everything themselves. How high we can go there is one of the future things you need to think about going into MaaS, I think. And I'll get a little bit back to that particular point. If we go to the travel planner, then this is, if you go on this Net Promoter Score and looks at that actually, and the numbers are not up here, but that's around 30. So this is an extremely popular service. It's been around for quite a few years. It's I think currently the 7th most used app in the country. And it's where people go to find information about public transport. When we asked them, and one of the organizations in public transport did that, they actually do start with this app, and then afterwards, if they don't find what they're looking for, they go for Google, which is, of course, for this service, the great competitor, if you like. And Google, Apple, and everyone else essentially uses our free data services in order to get their services out there. So the story behind this company that I'm heading is this one. And I think looking at it for this conference, it was actually quite interesting going back that I think this actually started back sometime around 1973 when a national zoning structure was decided politically. And just doing that, I think everyone who's worked with public transport will know that's an enormous task. And in 1996, there was this political vision, one trip, one ticket. And again, I think going around Europe, even in countries where the level of sophistication in public transport may be even higher than Denmark, that is something you rarely see. And it took from that particular decision 15 years until we managed to do it. But it split up into the travel planner company and the travel card company. And I think that was probably a very sensible decision at the time. And it's two very different stories. If you like, the travel planner started out with enthusiasm in a cellar somewhere. So that was a startup in 1998, essentially, and it was a public sector startup. And it's then grown organically from there to all the services that I showed previously. The travel card is a more classical tender out process, which Thales Accenture won back in 2005. Accenture then left. I think we were the lucky ones. Others have been left with Accenture. That has not been too much fun for them, but we were left with Thales, which is, I think, slightly more fun. But it still took almost 10 years or more from the start till the point where it actually was in full operation. I'll get back to some of the learnings about why that happened, because that has been a hectic and costly experience for both the travel card company and Thales as well. In 2017, there was a final project acceptance, and then this is where it gets interesting, and is of course that the ownership of these two companies were the same. And then this law was passed saying, hey, you need to, first of all, merge these two companies, which was already on the way. And at the same time, you need to provide a digital mobility service. So we've been merged last year. And now we need to figure out what does that digital mobility service actually mean. So we're in the middle of a strategy process. So this learning session here that I'm talking us through is actually what's going into our strategy process. So bringing me on, I'll go through some lessons learned, and I decided to start out with actually 3 classical pains of the traveler, because I think that is one of the things that going forward into Mars is one of the things we need to think about. So the first pain is the classical pain for a customer. Where do I buy a ticket? And I think that the thing is here that we have a tendency as public transport authorities of thinking about ourselves and our regional standpoint and what we need to provide, or the service that I'm providing. Travelers don't think like that. They think about where they're going, and they don't really essentially care about the services that we think are the most important things in the world. So there's an interesting, I think, paradox between the fact that you need local insight to provide good local transport, on the other hand, that the traveler you're providing services to don't really care about you, they care about where they're going. And if we are to make public transport go more green, if we are to play a role in a Mars solution, I'm very sorry to say we have to go national. Nobody cares about regional relevances or local lines. You can look at Uber, you can look at Google, they don't even necessarily care about national borders. So the fact that we are so focused on that, I think is a challenge that we need to look at and deal with. The second pain is another classical area, which is the customer's pain of, do I have the right ticket? So if you look at, and I think there's plenty of research into that, one of the big nervousness or the big concerns for travelers is that they're sitting in this carriage or in the bus and somebody comes by to check their the ticket and they are unsure about whether they bought the right ticket. And again, there's a paradox here, because this integrated tariff approach, if you do that right, is a main asset that we are managing, because it makes things extremely easy and efficient. So a lot of effort has to put into that. But we have a tendency of making it extremely complex, and complexity drives risk and cost. And if I look to the saying what was one of the cost drivers back in the project that took 10 years on the travel card and cost a lot of money, that was essentially that some of the complexity here was not dealt with and not understood before the project was started. So there is an area here which I think needs a lot of attention moving forward in reducing cost and complexity. And if we are to also maintain even or bring in new customers, we need to bring this complexity down, because complexity also deters customers for using our services. And I'll just acknowledge the fact that that is a lot of hard work. It's a lot of arm bending in order to get to where you need to go on that particular issue, but it is an issue. And the last thing is, again, the interchange. If you look at the cost of or the valuation of time during traveling, the value of time is twice as high at intersections. And that is, again, a classical problem. I don't know if I can move on from where I'm going. So we've had a tradition of looking at traffic information. Is the train, is the bus on time? We need to move into travel information, which is essentially what Google has taught all of us. And how have they taught us that travel information is key? They've given us Google Maps, which is it's a blue dot that just says, this is where you are. It's not where everything else is. It's where you are, and it is about the traveler. It is about that individual. In order to provide that information, again, you need somehow to bring this together, which is complex. But I think if we are again to play a central role in Mars, you need to have that integrated and have some regulation around that. So there is all delay information, all travel information is managed centrally in Denmark and then distributed out on screens as you see them up there. So essentially, if I should sum up, I think a key learning here is that we're a sector that has an inside-out tendency of starting with ourselves and thinking that is an interesting place to start. And I think going forward, it's extremely important to get an outside-in look. What are the look of the traveler? Again, I think this is pretty basic. That doesn't mean that we don't have a tendency of forgetting it. And even myself at times when you get so excited about what you're doing. So I think that was the first lessons. Another lesson I think is on infrastructure. It's complex and it's expensive. If I look at my cost basis, it drives, I think, about 50 to 60% of all the cost for running the system, and provided something as basic as a ticket. And I think it's extremely important that we start in this sector also to look at standardization and open systems. I think it's fair to say that closed vendor solutions are of the past, and the vendors that think they should deliver closed vendor solutions to you, you should not buy from. We need to learn from the IT sector of looking at objects that are open and that can integrate. And I think that is a key learning. And I'll get back to a little bit what that means, because that is a challenge going down that path. But I think, again, standardization, closed systems, you need to avoid that. That is an issue, and you need to drive your infrastructure costs down and be very clear on standardization there. And then there's another angle, and I'm sorry for the picture, but anyway, there's a lot of discussions about apps and stuff. And the point is that as public transport providers, we have a social responsibility that essentially nobody else wants. We have the elderly and we have the low-income groups. Those, to be quite clear, are key users of public transport, and we're more or less alone with that obligation. Google and the banks, they don't really care for these two groups, but we have to. So I think there's a challenge in thinking about, is the answer a sophisticated app to everything? And I think, again, this challenged the way some mass approaches are being taken, because essentially, is this guy where we go with an app and provide fancy solutions? Maybe not. When I have discussions with the public transport companies that I provide services to, they ask me this question exactly: how do I provide for these people? Because I cannot put a crumpled Danish kroner note onto a travel card. So how do we deal with this? That, I think, is something that we need to answer going forward. And then there's another very interesting thing that is something that's happened only in the recent years, is that we seem to think it's about ticketing. And it's not really. We're going from being part or providing or using the equipment industry because we're so impressed by all these things that we can put into buses and onto platforms. But the thing is that the more I look at it, the more clear it becomes to me that we're part of the payment industry. And the reason we're part of the payment industry and not the equipment industry is that, first of all, equipment is by now open standards and it's cheap. The other thing is that we move a hell of a lot of cash, and the payment industry has seen this. And the payment industry is opening up and changing fast. So, and my experience is anyway that we have, I said that we've been spotted, so be aware of the wolf. And I put in the Foursquare model of normal banking thinking. And I think it's extremely important that however you approach this, you need to figure out where your value add is and where you do not have a value add. How do you leverage the fact that banks and the financial sector can actually provide solutions for you that may be helpful, or engage with them? And I think this is something very new to this sector that we need to think about. So, but a positive thing, and I think this is another angle. This is an attempt, anyway, to make a drawing of the ecosystem that we see we're part of. We're in the middle of the circle. You always are when you drive your when you draw your ecosystem. Quite sure somebody else will draw it differently. But around us, we have the companies that own us, that we provide the core services to in public transport. But around that, you have a number of different providers, everything from car sharing to city bikes to national flight services to public transport providers of other sorts, rail services, what have you. And the thing is that by being highly regulated, we cannot overprice. We must treat all customers equal. We are, in my view, non-offensive. And when I talk to private providers of transport, they see that as an opportunity for them, because their alternative, and I think this is important to remember also when you position yourself in the market, is that their alternative is big tech. Big tech eats up companies. So they're a huge threat. They come in low and then they go up and eat the market. We can't do that because we're publicly owned and we have to behave differently because we're regulated. That's an opportunity. So private mobility suppliers actually want to work with us. And it's across a wide range. And I think that is a huge opportunity that we need to leverage. Last slide. And this is always the difficult part. How do you sum up that? So going forward, I think the question we're asking ourselves is, do we go with a single supplier or do we go step-by-step object-oriented? And there are cases for both, I would say. I have both solutions in-house. Some of them gives me huge problems, both by having a single supplier, but also going the object-oriented open platform way of going into a MaaS solution. And the last thing I'll say about this is that what the impact on the organization you need to have in place in order to manage MaaS as a provider of these integrated services is highly impacted by the path you choose along some of the questions I've raised, and there are probably a ton others. And we're looking at competences and steps that are not what we usually make use of in this sector. So I think that is a challenge as well. And with those final words, I'll stop. So if there are any questions, please, I'll be very happy to try to answer them.
Many thanks, Klaus. I'm very tentatively stepping back into this webinar because I seem to be the source of all technical problems related to this conference right now. But I'm hoping that you can see me and hear me. I certainly managed to hear all of that, and I'm glad I did, because there's a huge amount of very interesting stuff in there, particularly I think around some of the challenges that we recognise in terms of delivery of MaaS around understanding the user, around open data standards, around the need for collaboration, and also an interesting point there towards the end about where the threat may or may not lie, which I think is always an interesting question that's been discussed. We're running slightly behind time, mostly, again, my fault for the technical issues, so I am actually going to suggest that we don't have any immediate questions to this, and apologies for those who may have had some. Please, if you can, join us on Slack to discuss the points that Klaus has raised. Plenty there to discuss. But in the meantime, thank you, Klaus, for that presentation. We're going to move now on to our final speaker in this session, who is a Scotsman, but he's here to talk about Australia. Kevin Orr is CEO at Lift and Go, who are a growing shared mobility tech startup with operations in Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, and elsewhere. He has just returned from Australia to Scotland, literally during lockdown, and I'm delighted that he is to share his experiences from over the other side of the globe. Kevin, welcome, and over to you. And I hope it all goes smoothly.
Great. Thanks, Ali. Yeah, that was smooth for me, so hopefully it was smooth for everyone else. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. Great to be here, back in Bonnie, Scotland. I have been away for about 11 years now, living in Australia, working on a DRT solution, and I'm basically here to sort of chat about, I guess, an experience we had with the Transport for Scotland equivalent, called Transport for New South Wales. So I should also mention that this is my first keynote. I did warn Ali that this was my first keynote, and he decided to proceed anyway. So if there's any issues, go directly to Ali. Yeah, so three main things I'm going to cover today is with just provide a brief intro to Liftango. We have a video to kind of explain a lot of it, so I'll switch to that very shortly. But it does provide context of what we do in DRT, demand responsive transport, and I'll touch briefly on, I guess, DRT's role in the mobility as a service ecosystem, where we provide the value for the journey that we're all going on. And then share the experience of an innovative on-demand bus, or DRT. I will use those two phrases interchangeably. One is the wording that is used and adopted in Australia, and one's obviously the wording here. But it was a hugely influential on-demand bus trial that we were involved in. And I would quite safely say that Liftango wouldn't be around without the project that we were involved in. And if we were still around by chance, we probably would have built the wrong solution. So I'm going to sort of explain, I guess, the role of policy in influencing the right solutions to come into the market and help design them appropriately for the public. And finally, I'm probably just going to stick up for the hipsters as well. I'm definitely a hipster myself. I did just shave the beard because of the wife wasn't terribly happy. But I've noticed a little bit of pushback on some of the technologists, the hipster hackers, hustlers that come up to you in the conferences and show you shiny things. I do agree that isn't the right way, just to put in technology and expect it to work, but there are ways of going about it, data-driven, obviously, designs and things like that. So I'm hoping by the end of this keynote that you will see that some of the solutions out there are actually following the right track using data to design things. So, okay, on that note, I will jump straight into screen share, so bear with me. Here. Skip the video. I think that's probably the most appropriate thing. Bear with me, I'll jump straight into the. Probably going to save me a lot of time. So apologies for that. Okay. Just checking, Ali, you can see my screen there. Okay, great. Well, skipping the video, I'll try and do the introduction slightly differently. Lyft Tango provides DRT solutions. We are working in areas of public transport, corporate transport, and community transport, where I guess fixed route buses are predominantly running, I guess, with low numbers of passengers. That's the main sort of use case for DRT or DDRT, and where we have the biggest impact. So those are the areas we work in, particularly rural, particularly regional, and suburban. I guess looking at higher density areas of cities, DRT isn't as effective in a lot of cases as a fixed route bus put on in a number of cases. So, and underneath that main use case that we're solving, there are other smaller solutions. So removing the ghost bus from our suburbs and regional areas where there's a 40-seater diesel bus driving around without very many people in them. Providing that first mile, last mile connectivity to other forms of mass transit. We're looking at trains, ferries, BRT as well, bus rapid transit, or buses on trunk routes. Providing a greater level of equity to transportation. So collecting users' needs that potentially need a disability accessible vehicle, for example. We're collecting that up front, and we're able to provide vehicles appropriate for that passenger, more personalized service for the majority that do get, I guess, forgotten about in a lot of cases. This is really interesting. So we're actually using newly built infrastructure. So in Australia, there's an awful lot of motorway getting built. And in a lot of cases, the fixed route buses have been designed 5 to 10 years ago. So they're not actually taking into account some of these new routes and these new, I guess, infrastructure that can reduce passenger travel time. So in a lot of cases, we're finding that with the dynamic routing that we use, that we're actually using the latest and greatest infrastructure as soon as it's ready. And also excess driving as well. So dead kilometers is what we're helping to reduce. These are the three main areas with the user application. I guess the main user experience is similar to what Uber, Lyft, Didi, all the main operators in the sort of ride-hail space have made normal. The program, the on-demand bus program that we were part of, was really analyzing if that technology could be applied into the bus network and if it works. So that was one of the premises to bring in that level of technology. Obviously, it's more complex. You're having larger vehicles, more shuttle types, 8 to 12 seaters in a lot of cases, or larger, 17 in many cases. So you need an algorithm behind the scenes to automate a lot of that to, I guess, hit the KPIs of the bus companies. They don't really want to run a taxi service. They want to run a bus service. So how do you fit enough people into that vehicle is a very key difference between, I guess, a ride hail and what we're offering. Operations platform, I guess there's an awful lot of data to be found here. Call center staff, so Klaus was very bang on the money when he talked about some of our problems is that we don't have everyone adopting technology, and we still need to cater for those demographics. The older demographic is a prime example of that. So having the ability to call up instead of, use an app when you've never used Uber in a lot of cases it's a key problem that we solve and we have to solve where we work. And then driver platform, which is very simple due to the driver having to not have to touch anything during the trip, but does provide a nicer level of personalization to the passengers and to the drivers, that nice interaction. And then behind the scenes, I just want to touch on some of the simulation work that we see as key. In a lot of cases, DRT has failed from the outset in many trials and projects due to the wrong use case getting proposed, potentially using a DRT service in the wrong area where there was it should have been a fixed bus route, or was working quite contently as a non-technology sort of community transport service. So simulations are key. Also, complexities of politics, geography, those sorts of things have to get thought about up front. So we do a lot of that work up front with the clients to make sure we are doing the best solution that solves everybody's problems, not just a couple. And similarly, we work in fixed bus routes and trains and ferries. So we're very much integrating into an existing network. So trunk routes, hubs, mobility hubs, we work interchangeably into those areas to get more people sharing, essentially. The more services they have to use, then I guess just driving their car is key to getting people adopting our service and other shared mobility public transport services. And Ali mentioned where we've been based for many years. So we started about 4.5 years ago in Australia, and we're part of the on-demand bus trials for the last sort of 3.5 years. So lots of activity down in the Australia Pacific region. Last year, about 18 months ago, actually, we rolled out into North America. So Seattle, Vancouver, on the east as well, in Boston. And then earlier this year, we rolled out in the UK with Go Ahead Bus and North Lincolnshire Council. So we operate the technology for the DRT service, which is probably the largest rural DRT service in the UK. It's 147 square miles region down in and around Scunthorpe. And we do have other projects locally, Sweden as well. So very briefly on the trends, public transport and DRT's role. So before COVID, there was two diverging theologies almost to how can we reverse the decline of public transport passengers. In a lot of cases, it was put on more buses was I guess an easier. So we should almost in a lot of cases just provide that turn up and go service. And in New Zealand and many cities in New Zealand, that's actually worked really, really well, but typically in the higher density areas. And then the other focus was to look at a technology layer. That is obviously where we work, and how can we provide us the same level of convenience, or a greater level of convenience, to passengers to get them to a public transport service. And also on the other side, reduced overhead costs for, I guess, what is an existing fixed route service. And since COVID, I think the passenger decline has obviously gone even further. So it's essentially gone off a cliff right now. So we are entering into new problems of how can we get people back onto a service? How can we re-engage them into trusting public transport network again? And obviously, in my view, we're talking a greater adoption of technology around, safety, contact tracing, those types of things is starting to be more pertinent and more key than maybe it was a year ago. Again, just to reiterate, this is some of the areas that we work really well in. We're not trying to replace trunk routes. We're working in to increase greater coverage into those trunk routes. That is a key component. And where those trunk routes aren't really patronized, there is another option that can be simulated and looked at and essentially used as a potential solution. And it is about bringing, I guess, what is a fixed static public transport service closer to the car. That is the role of what we're offering here, getting people into a slightly more convenient service that drops them closer to their home in many cases, more accessible obviously to people with disability accessibility needs, and also more frequent, or at least more bookable at a time that is user friendly, I suppose, and more in line with what the passenger's requesting. Okay, jumping on to the crux of what I want to talk about is Australia's DRT journey. Like I mentioned, it started roughly 3.5 years ago now, and it really focused around will on-demand buses become valuable, or cost-effective, valuable, and convenient to the constituents of New South Wales. It was a hugely innovative designed sort of trial. It was structured in a I guess a way that was meant to provide collaboration from the industry. Typically in the past, you would have had a very closed network almost of people not telling you what they were bidding and how they were bidding. Transport for New South Wales decided to say, we want consortiums. We want technology companies coming in that already have a solution, because we have a 6-month delivery window, for example. So you need to partner up with a bus operator. And that bus operator should also work with universities and academia to have the, I guess, the greater checks and balances and analysis there. So what that meant was, as a young startup at that time, we were essentially courted because we had a solution out there. So we had, I guess, a situation where Keolis, this is a large French bus company, was actually presenting to a room full of people on their proposed bid. So there was no Chinese walls or anything, and they were essentially looking for partners to come and talk to them afterwards to kind of build this consortium, which is very different to the experiences we normally have, where we're spending time trying to knock on the doors and introduce ourselves and get known. So it's very, very interesting structure, one that worked really favorably in the hands of, I guess, the sort of younger startups. And it was by design by Transport for New South Wales. It was very innovative. The procurement cycle was 6 months. So it was a total of 3 years, but it was 6 months rolling. So you had to prove in that 6 months that you were doing something valuable and innovative. But then you had to offer in the next 6 months something different. So you had to say, look, we've done something great here, but we're potentially going to reduce convenience or passenger happiness by trying something else. Transport for New South Wales wanted that learning. They didn't want, I guess, the end goal almost. They wanted to create the end goal at the end of the program that would help define the way they went forward as a strategy. So there was a lot of cases we had a great feature, or we were very reluctant to change things in some cases because it was working really well, but we were influenced to make those changes purely for the data. So what I really liked about that was they were essentially funding an acceptance of failure. So they were looking at a large program, and I should say it was 10 projects across Sydney, large dense area, and 10 projects across rural New South Wales. This was exciting for us, I guess, to try different areas. We knew a lot of operators would work well in, I guess, more of a city setting. We were more confident we would work quite well in the kind of suburbs, rural setting. So that was a great project for us to get involved in. And we were of a suitable size that we matched, I suppose, what Transport for New South Wales were after, which was the agility to try new things and learn and adopt. So larger companies would have struggled to move so quickly, and smaller companies would have struggled due to the impacts of having to move so quickly. So we were probably in that sweet spot. And we were also in with the best breed from across the world. So these projects brought in large organizations from America. They had a bus operator actually buy the technology of Bridge, which was a bus, it was more of a crowdsourced bus route service in Boston. So a bus company decided to become a technology company in some regards. So we were getting challenged, I guess, as this in this competitive manner with the best of breed, which again was by design, was to have this competition, prevented monopoly, stop people getting, I guess, a little bit lazy. So it was a very innovative program. This is how the service models evolved. So we started with multiple variants, I suppose, of, I guess, matching type. So total flexibility, so door to door. We had door to hub, meeting point to hub, and more of a fixed route mass transit feeder. By the end of the sort of 2.5 years, we'd all, at least in the higher density areas, we'd moved towards more of a meeting point to hub model. And that was essentially over time, there's more operational effects or operational benefits of having meeting points of virtual bus stops and having an endpoint being a hub like a train station or a ferry station due to the convergence of lots of people going. So it increased the sharing more so than, say, a complete door-to-door service. But at the same time, there was an evolution that we had to go through. So door-to-door has its place in the early days. Once density gets up to a certain level, it definitely is worth evolving to other models. This is one of our use cases, more rural. It was in an area called Woy Woy. Spike Milligan's parents actually lived in Woy Woy, and they described it as, or Spike Milligan described it as the only above ground cemetery he's ever been to in the world. So it says a little bit about the demographics we were working in. We had 5 fleets and connecting into train and ferry stations there as well. One of the major outcomes for passengers that we heard over the course of the projects was that they were they weren't going out to buy a second car. In a lot of cases, they were considering it just to travel to the train station or the ferry station. We're quite happy by preventing that second car being bought. And a lot of cases, we did hear people selling their second car as well, which was great to hear. That was one of the major parts. But we did increase the coverage, so we did manage to get an awful lot more people using public transport service. And I should as well say that this was overlaid over a fixed fixed bus network as well. So nothing was taken away. It was just overlaid during the trial period. So it worked nicely in with existing services. And similarly for transport authorities, they saw a number of cost savings, which I'll talk a little bit more later. The major value to them was the granularity of the data they were able to get. Booking requests, when the peaks were, how could they evolve the service to better suit their passengers? Was all the things that they were incredibly surprised and happy about. And just to focus on the results very quickly, I might just read this out, it's very key. So I have got the links to the full report at the bottom. I believe this presentation will get shared, which is great. But the major finding was that ODPT, which is on-demand public transport, can deliver better customer services and improve the cost effectiveness of delivering public transport overall if it is integrated with the whole public transport network. ODPT is the ability to provide public transport that is more convenient, efficient and cost effective in metropolitan, outer metropolitan, rural and regional New South Wales, particularly in costly and poorly patronized portions of the network. A fully integrated network with ODPT services can be lower cost and provide better quality service than an integrated network without on-demand. And what Transport for New South Wales have gone and done after the period of trials is, because they have found that it is more cost effective in a number of areas, they have rolled those rolled on-demand bus requirements into the larger contracts for public transport that they typically franchise out to split out the portion of the city into into different franchises and offer them out to the large bus operators. So they have found that essentially, where is it? Apologies. They have found that instead of offering 8 peak buses, for example, that require 16 peak drivers, they can actually save money and provide a better service by offering 5 peak buses with 12 peak drivers, 2 on-demand buses with 4 part-time drivers. And the costs that they can save are considerable for the taxpayer. And the service level actually goes up in a lot of cases. This is another metric that we always get judged upon. What you see at the very start of that graph is all the trials, all 20 trials that were launched, and the cost per trip at the start of the trials was extremely high, which is to be expected. Passenger numbers were fairly low to begin with. But what you've seen is once the evolution of the service designs and just time in general of adopting, I guess, new, or people adopting the new service has meant that the cost per trip has come down to what is comparable levels with fixed bus networks. A lot of arguments come back on this is more expensive to use or it's more expensive to implement, which I think it is quite evidently in the early stages. But if you are committed to the adoption of it, you will see a more comparable cost per trip over time. And again, this is some passenger satisfaction quotes. I'll probably not spend too long on this. I'm running out of time, so I'll let people peruse some of this data at a more appropriate time. And this is the last slide, just to focus on the effect of COVID. I think we are seeing that it has affected our transport system. I think it will be forever. Just the movement of people, for example, to work and home isn't the same as it was before. So I think we are going to see a redesign of public bus networks. I think DRT is going to have its place accelerated in the ecosystem because of this. A more data-driven service, more flexible, is something we will need to implement in more areas as well. So just wanted to touch on that, and I am running out of time, so I will stop there, Ali, and offer myself questions if I have the time.
Thank you, Kevin. A very interesting oversight there, and I think it's really important when we consider DRT as part of that mass mix. But there were some broader messages there around funding and also procurement of innovation, which I think is important. I love the line, funding on acceptance of failure, which I think is always quite an interesting one in the innovation space and an important one. Apologies again, we did have some more sound issues there. I realise it's interesting to note that the one presentation we've had no issues with at all this morning was from our colleague and friend in Denmark. So I don't know what that says about Danish connectivity over Scottish connectivity, but we shall say no more. That now does bring us to pretty much to the end of the session. Apologies, we don't really have time for questions for Kevin either, but I do note that Kevin is on Slack, so please do jump across to Slack, and I'm sure we can continue the conversation there. Just a reminder that all sessions of this conference have been recorded, and we will be making them available online through the MASS Scotland website soon, and we'll obviously be able to tidy a few things up and put in the Cabinet Secretary's full video, hopefully without any of the interruption. As I say, do please join us on Slack. You have just got enough time to nip away and grab a coffee before our next session, which is their plenary session looking more closely at MASS in Scotland and the MASS programme. That will kick off at 11 o'clock. As I mentioned, we are going to close this session to prepare for the next one. So once I've closed this, just simply click on your day one link again and you'll be put back into the waiting room ready for the next session. Thank you again to our speakers. Thank you for all of you at home. Thanks for bearing with us through a few of our connectivity issues. We hope those will reduce as the day and tomorrow go on, but we'll hope to see you very soon.